Well, thank you everybody for joining us for the first meeting of the Expert Advisory Committee in 2020 and for the next phase of this committee's work. And in opening, I just want to say Happy New Year to everybody. And thank you all so much for the work that we did last year. I'm going to speak for the committee and say to these members of the state for whom we have been laboring so hard. We're really proud of what we did, and we hope that you find it as useful as we think it should be for the state. And we're looking forward to seeing how you reflect some of that in the state's own issuance of its recommendations. And we're going to ask you to talk about that in the course of this meeting. So cool. So in terms of our agenda today, this is really a let's recoalesce, let's come back together again, recenter and focus on this year's work, define this year's work meeting. It's not a long meeting, and wanted to kind of create the foundation and direction for our work this year, given the outstanding product that we delivered last year on time. But we will be extremely serious as we continue our work. I need to teach you guys. And in terms of that agenda, working with Jen and Adam, our focus today really is just to remind ourselves of what we've been asked to do, the rules by which we do that. We want to talk about our meeting schedule and locations so that that is set. I think we should dedicate some more time to the guest speakers that we want. I've gotten some suggestions from folks. I've asked others for suggestions. Reissue that request to everybody in the room and on Zoom here. And then we want to define our outcomes for the year, what we'd like to deliver to the state. So that is our just general agenda for the day. And with that, I'll call the roll. This is the fulfillment of a kindergarten dream. You know, you get to call the roll. Okay. Well, the way the list is done, I get to ask if I am present, and I am, generally speaking. Then, yes. Mark. Yes. Here. William. Here. Mara. Yes. Chelsea. Matt is expected to arrive, but he's not yet here. Marian, I believe I see your face online. Is Marian present?
Yes, sorry. Yes, I'm here. My mute button moves slowly. Present.
Nathaniel?
Hello, yes, I'm here.
Christy?
Present.
You brought us a present. You are so nice. John?
I'm here.
And is there any other member of the committee who is online, but we can?
I'm here. I'm having some audio problems right now, but this is Melissa.
Melissa, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, and Lori, this is Marianne again. I just wanted to make a request. On this roll call sheet, it seems to indicate that my affiliation is Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, but I mentioned this a couple meetings ago that is not my affiliation with respect to this committee. So can that be changed back to the original affiliation that I altered it? I think it was back in last September or so.
Yes, and I think thanks to Adam, as they say, no sooner said than done.
Lovely, thank you. And the same strangeness too is on the draft reports. My affiliation is not quite correct there as well, and I'll email Adam to correct that too.
Okay. Our collective apologies for that. Do we have any members of the public present? Do we need to have a public comment on the agenda and roll call? Yeah, okay. We'll move on then from that. So in this next period of the agenda, we're gonna turn to Jen and Adam for a reminder of the charge that was laid out in 1757, and we'll roll very directly into the infamous Bradley Keene rules. So over to you.
Okay, well, we'll keep it very brief on Bagley Keene. But these are the same exact slides from the February meeting of last year. So we wanted to just put this up on the screen for a minute to remind everyone sort of what's called for in AB 1757. I won't go through all of these. Obviously, we've talked about the targets and then integrating the targets into relevant state planning efforts, working on how do we improve our GHG emissions accounting, and then updating the natural working lands climate smart strategy. So these are sort of the core tenets of AB 1757, not explicitly saying this is what the expert advisory committee should do, but here are sort of the elements of what we need to do in 1757 over the years to come. So I think it's just good sort of at the start of this year too, to have us all remind one another of sort of what is AB 1757, since there's a lot of elements in the bill sort of throughout the bill too. So I just spent a couple minutes before this meeting sort of rereading the bill, and I'd recommend all of us dig back into that as we think about, you know, the year ahead and the role of this committee in helping to implement 1757. So on this next slide, again, you all have seen this at the February meeting of 2023, but specifically in the bill, it says the expert advisory committee is tasked with informing the development of this ambitious range of targets, informing and reviewing future modeling and analysis for natural and working lands, advising state agencies on implementation strategies and barriers to implementation, and providing those recommendations specifically in the context of the state updating its natural and working lands climate smart strategy, which we are due to do by January 1, 2025. So you all will hear about that from Plessy and Amanda shortly, but just wanted to sort of say this at the outset, so we're sort of on the same page as we think about, you know, 1757 collectively and what we're all charged to do, the state and the committee, and then specifically what the committee is tasked with doing to implement 1757. So I'll pause if any of my state colleagues want to add anything else or any color commentary on 1757, or if any committee members want to share anything that pops out to them. But I know you all have seen these slides before. Yeah.
Just again, from the point of view of, I think we focused almost all of our work this past year on bullet number 1 with consideration to bullet number 4. And so in this present year, the last 3 bullets, certainly the first 2, and then pulling out and clarifying more on the 3rd, makes sense for our agenda this year. Any thoughts from any committee members around that?
Okay, well, I don't have anything else on 1757. These slides will be shared. The bill is on our website, on our nature-based climate solutions page. So always helpful to revisit that. And we as a team are often doing that to remind ourselves of the deadlines and the charge there. On Bagley Keene, I'll keep this brief as well, because I know even last year there were a couple different law changes for Bagley Keene that were often confusing for all of us. And I know we had the option to go virtual at the end of last year. Going forward, we're hoping to still convene this committee in person and have a forum in person. So that would be 8 members. However, if we need some members that have to be virtual for any reason, we can have them be virtual and they don't need to notice their physical location. That's not this primary physical location. So I think that's all you should know at this point. And I think as Gloria's meetings come up and you have questions, you can reach out to me and Plessy and Adam about how to navigate Bagley Keene. And if you continue to work in subgroups, we can talk about that as well. But I would say, the goal is still to come together in person with a quorum. But if we need some people online, that is possible, and they don't need to notice their physical location. So we'll just need to make sure in advance of every meeting that we actually have that quorum for Sacramento or wherever we're meeting. Anything else you all want to add? Barb, scenery, CDFA. Okay, but yeah, let's take it meeting by meeting on that meeting by meeting. Okay, I don't have anybody else to add. I think it's over to you, Lori, to start mapping those other items we talked about as far as schedule and guest speakers and outcomes, etc.
So it is up to us how often we wish to be and where. And how we want to deliver our recommendations to the state. So I thought I would offer some ideas for everyone's consideration. I thought I think if we were to meet 6 times this year, that would be great. This is one of them. I know that many of you have challenges in meeting over the summer. And that for others, the summer is the time when you get a lot of work done. But I think in terms of that, if you work back from delivering our final thoughts and recommendations, which I would recommend we do in a written form as a report again, if we look at delivering that mid-November to beginning of December, from that kind of time frame, and we work back, and I'm looking at Amanda here a little bit because she may be feeling, I'm supposed to deliver the update on January 1, and you're saying you'd give me this when? I don't know if I read your face correctly.
I did.
Okay. Well, it's one of those things where certainly November, I think, would probably be reasonable from the delivery date of that. There are obviously going to be some deliberations prior to that, which may be informative for you. But generally speaking, I think unless we were to really segment our work so that we focused on the climate smart land strategy and gave you thoughts on that beforehand, why don't we start with, would people be amenable to 5 more meetings in person?
Or you can start with number 3 first and then work back for the meeting schedule and guest speakers. I think that'd be helpful.
Well, we can certainly start there, but the timing of that is going to be a little challenging, as we just saw. If the deliverable is a report which addresses our recommendations around modeling, elements for the climate smart land strategy, and acceleration of implementation, those might be 3 chapters or 3 segments of this report that would address the bullets that are specifically in the legislation.
Or 3 reports. You could think about doing them.
It could.
Yeah.
It could.
I don't know if that'd be better or worse, but.
Yeah, it all depends on if you parallel track or sequentially track. But that's an option. Melissa?
One thing that I found that was helpful to kind of focusing our work last year was knowing that the state agencies were putting together, a specific set of targets and that they needed our input by a particular time. And I guess I was wondering with respect to that 3rd bullet, I think you've identified the update to the climate smart strategy as one place where our input could be valuable. But I guess I'm wondering on I don't know what kind of input that would require. And then in terms of the charge for the expert advisory committee, for example, informing and reviewing modeling and analysis, I'm not clear if that is something that is a part of the climate strategy or if that, input, or if that's something that's a part and an ongoing activity. And
That's
if that has
related
any.
to the scoping plan update.
Okay, Yeah, so I guess I'm just wondering, like, if we knew a little bit more, that, like, whether it all goes into one report at the end of the year, or not, might depend a little bit on when our input can actually have the most impact. I would, yeah.
Well, there are a couple of thoughts before pulling on others here. One is that for the climate smart land strategy input, that will also include, I suspect, the barriers to or accelerating the implementation of the achievement of the targets. So those things might go together. And from the perspective of providing input on modeling, and certainly Adam has various thoughts about that. That is somewhat of an ongoing item. And it'll be a constantly improving, kind of like you have the task of Sisyphus, right? That's the thing about modeling, it is always improving. But the scoping plan update for which the modeling is particularly useful is when, Adam?
Well, the scoping plan update is every 5 years. So the next one will be in 2027, which actually is not that far away. So we have to begin 2 years before that. So that's next year. But there's additional modeling that goes beyond just the scoping plan modeling that we also do. So, which includes the inventory, but then also part of 1757 for a car is also quantifying like the impact that management specifically is having. So essentially doing like causal assessments. So that's like a little bit of modeling and data science as well. So yeah.
But that's an ongoing issue. The
So
climate
less
smart
time.
land strategy has more of a target.
Yeah, that's less timing specific. Yeah, so, from a timing point of view, for me, for modeling input, and when we all have our discussion about modeling, I think you all know we're doing a big hiring push at CARB right now for all these folks. And so I would like as many of those people already on board so they can be here and like participate and hear this discussion. So I'm recommending we kind of push out the modeling for a couple months, that discussion, so that those people can participate.
Are there any thoughts or comments online before we look around the room again? Not seeing any hand raises there, but if somebody does and can see better than I can see, let me know. Yeah. So I think that while the modeling conversation can be continuous on some level. And I'm sure that CARB will be receptive to recommendations throughout the time period and may well want to continue the conversation thereafter. But smart land strategy does have an endpoint and is very, very directly related to the recommendations that we put forward about targets and implementation with that. So in terms of a deliverable, we'll go back to this notion of being able to deliver something as a written report is a way to focus our energies and outcome from that. Doesn't mean that we can't finish one portion or a section earlier than another section, but we rolled it all up from our work is done. November is a recommendation.
Yes, I'd say I don't have a strong preference for my experience was, and I anticipate our experience will be in that if we have multiple parts trying finish simultaneously, then we have each limited capacity to sort of engage in other parts of the course. So it was very difficult for me to both fulfill my obligation with develop plans and play a deep attention of it. So I think staging to the extent that we can is good. And how that staging works, I can't see clearly. Just I'll spend some time focusing on different systems or different aspects of the problem that we're addressing, so that we don't get to October and all end up scrambling together. It is good.
Well, sure.
Hi, this is Marion from the virtual verse. The sound is really, really bad. I don't know if there's a way to move the speaker or the microphone closer to where folks are talking, but I couldn't hear what the last speaker was saying.
Be quiet.
So, Mark was flagging that, if everything gets rolled up into one report, his experience last year was that he didn't have as much time to do review of other sections as compared to the section that he was focused on. And so he was, to interpolate what you said, was kind of saying, hey, maybe we could finish one piece and then another piece and then another piece. That's kind of what I was hearing.
I think we'll get better group participation.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on what Mark said and ask you two and Jen, since if we did that and if the committee wanted to do this, if we did finish drafts of material earlier, is there an interest to review draft and give some feedback, even though we wouldn't be quite done with what we're doing, if we want to do that? The committee has to decide we want to do that, but is that a way to get active engagement as we move along at least once, so that we are aware of ongoing actions that we may not know because of, our life experience, so that it's sort of, what's going on behind the scenes, we may need to respond to better. So, but big question, like, is there time or interest if the committee wants to do that?
Yeah, and I would say, like speaking for me, unless any of my colleagues object, like I'm happy to be called by, any of you or subcommittees, so we can talk things through too. So I don't want to.
I think it's more of an informal review.
Yeah.
Carrie.
Well, that's what I mean. I don't mean
Yeah.
formal, but I mean,
Yeah.
like, hey, would you like to read my messy draft, kind of things. Yeah.
We are gonna discuss a timeline for the strategy update in the second part of this meeting, and that may help inform when at least the recommendations for the strategy, not necessarily the modeling, standard accounting, could be put in if there were a staggered upload.
Anybody online? So let's try to come to a conclusion on the number of meetings. We could do more. I think it'd be hard if we did less, because we tend to spread out if we have fewer meetings than that, but certainly open to entertaining. So any other recommendations on the table?
Thought about it more than I have in that sense. Maybe a starting point to me.
I guess it's about a reason.
I'm just trying to get one piece of this decision.
Right. So are we?
Yes. Can I bifurcate these things?
Right.
Okay. So for the group as a whole, this is the recommendation of how often we would get together in addition to the meetings today. I'm suggesting a minimum of 5 times.
I'm going to suggest endorse that with a proviso. I think that if we were to, we aren't going to know exactly how much work we have. So I think if we schedule like 2 meetings between now and when summer starts, and then have the 2 or 3 firm meetings toward the end of the summer, but have some, in case we need them, slots.
Sure.
That would, so like have 5 firm slots, but then a couple of optional slots in the fall, I think would be a good idea. If it gets away from us.
Okay.
I wonder if we do.
Well, let's get to that piece. So I think we have a floor of 5 more meetings, which we'll work on an agenda to try and not have anything in peak halfway through June to halfway through August timeframe. The second piece of this is this one about we want to keep our functioning subgroups, which we developed by land type last year. And my bias is that those groups work pretty well and delivered products well, so that there was a functional unit for each of those things. I'm certainly happy if people want to continue with that. If you want to move groups, I mean, no group was exclusionary as long as we didn't break quorum. So, you know, it was that way. But in terms of making recommendations on land types, we did, which is for the climate smart land strategy, plus cross-sectionally. And we did the cross-sectional work all together. So that's an option. Are folks amenable to that option, or would you rather always meet as a whole?
Yeah, I agree with your suggestion of remaining our current structure with the option to move subgroups.
I don't know, I guess I'm just having a hard time, I still don't understand like what success looks like, and so I'm having a hard time making like decisions around what would be the best process to get there. I don't know if I'm wrong.
Well, I guess everybody has a different definition of success, but I think the delivery of cogent recommendations to the state about improvements in climate smart land strategy and thoughtful observations about modeling, you know, assumptions, approaches, data, that's successful. But whether or not the state uses them, it's up to the state. So from a successful influencing point of view, I don't know that I can hazard on that. But I think from the point of view of meeting the objectives of the legislation, delivering those recommendations in a tangible and clear form, to me looks like a successful work product. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah. Sorry, everyone, we're still having trouble with people online hearing you all, so if we can speak up. Laura, you're coming through, but some others are not.
So generally, yes, but what that actually means is a little fuzzy. I think for me anyway, in the last one, I think that was the basis underlying my suggestion to have a couple of flex spots for fall, because I don't think we know how much work this is going to be or how much it's going to entail. And we're just going to have to start digging into it.
I'll add that this is at least where you all may want to weigh in on the strategy update is something we're hoping to have a conversation about in the next hour.
Yeah, I was just wondering if we could flip the agenda a little bit and start hearing about, maybe it's impossible because of the public, like the agenda has to be set and what have you, but I do feel like some of the decisions that we're making, it would be helpful to make in the context of knowing, especially like the timeline for the climate smart strategy and what kinds of updates they're already planning. So, because right now it's all very hypothetical. And so I feel like knowing whether we need 2 meetings or 6 meetings between now and June, you know, sort of, yeah, it's hard. So, and also like whether a written report is what they need, or whether we need to get certain people in this room for the people working on that update to hear from. We think, you know, the state really needs to know about what this person, you know, this person has to offer in terms of maybe the ideas that have been incorporated so far. I don't know. I was just wondering, it might help some folks who are struggling to grab onto what we're trying to do in this next phase to hear more about the climate smart strategy updates first. But I don't know if we can
Let me make
that.
a suggestion. If we have a framework that we're operating from, we're going to continue in our subgroups, which can meet as frequently or infrequently as that subgroup determines. Between here and June, you know, just take your hypothetical, there's no way we're going to do 6 meetings. That's just, you know.
Well, the subgroups could meet though. Like if there's some particular
Subgroups can do that without having a public agreement.
Okay.
Subgroups are able to operate on their own. They're under quorum. They can talk independently. They don't need public input and so on. Just like we did last year. Was there a?
Yeah, Chris, hand.
Hey, Christy.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in that I liked working in the subgroups and I thought that was very effective. I'm not sure that those topical areas are going to be the right ones for this next phase. That's my only, like, I wonder if there's going to be a lot more overlap among across land types in terms of barriers and modeling. And so I guess I'm agreeing with Laura a little bit on that one in terms of, I think we should plan that some of the work will be in subgroups. Whether those subgroups end up structured around land type, I think depends as we get a little further into the work.
Or how many people have actually looked at the land strategy? So you have a sense of the structure. And Chrissy, if you haven't, I mean, certainly Plessy will take us through that. But I think there is correspondence in that structure.
We can't flip the agenda. However, at the end of each agenda item, there's a discussion period. So you can talk about whatever you want during any discussion period. So you can have this discussion again at that point.
Yeah.
So then can I move that we adopt Lori's proposal and then revisit it after we hear from the.
I need Amanda to give part of the presentation, and she is locked up for the next 30 minutes.
Oh, dear.
You know, I can also provide a little.
Why don't we do, we have the opportunity, we can come back to this when Amanda is back or right before she's back. But we also want to talk at this point about who we want to have in as guest speakers.
I think I need more context to even know that. I feel like.
Well, you don't have to make a recommendation today. It's great if you do, but there is the opportunity to contribute further. I think the general rubric as speakers that we're looking for is in terms of the modeling that has been done in the scoping plan. Are there people who you would recommend, any of you being the you, to help inform what is in the scoping plan and how it might be best amended? If it needs something along those lines. And there have been several suggestions in that regard. Carrie and Will have given us 3. I put forward 3. Debbie's put forward a couple, I think. But I want to make sure that everybody knows that that opportunity is there. And then I would also tier guest speakers to issues such as how to accelerate implementation in the natural and working lands sector for the various solutions that we recommended in the report, and even for other aspects of the state goals. So, you know, we did thinking about barriers. So one way is to think about it, removing barriers, and other ways to think about how to accelerate and the two together. So those are key areas for guest speakers to open the door to everybody to say, who would you like to hear from in those venues?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that maybe also before you choose speakers, I could provide a little context on actual modeling needs that we see as priorities. So then, you know, you can invite modelers that, you know, can address those needs.
Sure.
Yeah, okay. So priority modeling gaps, I guess, for us are urban forests. And, you know, again, I want us to, when we get to this point, have more of a discussion because it's like very specific, you know, needs that we have, not just like generic urban forest models, but we have like certain drivers that we want to be able to simulate into the future. Also, and this goes for everything I'm about to say too. So deserts, also wetlands, and, you know, I know Melissa has explored this with us in OPC, but maybe it's also about seeing what's there, but then also brainstorming how things can be altered to different scales. And then, like I said, there are these causal assessments that we're going to have to do, which are a new task for the state in general. So that is to say, the inventory is going to be tracking environmental change, but now we have to go beyond that and say, what is driving that environmental change, specifically, what is the impact of management, and teasing that particular piece out. And then in the ag sector, it's more about like, how do we abstract the ag sector a little bit more so that we can scale the modeling and do some sort of empirically constrained modeling. Also, not just for future projections, but for inventory when we have no reporting information about what's going on. So somehow combining remote sensing and modeling. And actually that goes for most sectors is like an inventory constrained model. So not just the future projections, not just the scoping plan, but being able to quantify those hard to quantify carbon pools like soils, for example. So, you know, we can use remote sensing and get that above ground carbon, but then we need to, you know, couple that with some modeling to get everything else. Oh, and then also just a general kind of discussion that this would actually probably help for us to explain modeling to the outside world is like what's gained and lost with these various modeling techniques and methods and or models you choose. So that is to say, you know, we know as modelers, there are different questions you can ask and answer, and there's some information you lose or gain depending on the type of model you choose, but the public doesn't necessarily know that. And I think having a third party group of people sort of explain like, yeah, you can use this model, it'll do this, but you don't get this extra information if you did something more complex. And that's
Adam, can we make sure that everybody online could hear you, because your voice is soft over here? Can everybody hear that?
Yeah, actually, Adam's coming through clear online.
Perfect.
Thank you. Good. Yes.
So when you say that in this causal assessments, thinking about the impact of management, in that, are you including sort of impact of policies? So I'm thinking, for example, there are programs to incentivize urban tree planting. Those have impacts, or whether there's $10 or $10 million in those pools. So that's a policy.
Yeah. Right. So that would be an ultimate objective. However, it's like there are several modeling steps to get to that point, because you make a policy, you don't exactly know what's driving the actual on the ground, you know, change. But I mean, that's essentially what we're going to want eventually, is not just like what's the impact of our action. Yes, that is the first and primary objective that we want, but then it's also like what caused that to change. So that's that policy question. I think. Yeah.
Because I just said that when we approach that, really, I think speaks to the issue of this committee and the expertise that we have here. There's like, you know, bringing economists on board to think about inputting into the model.
Yeah.
That would, I think, drive strongly what kind of people we.
Right. Yeah, and that's, I mean, that is also another thing too, is which somehow didn't make it on my list, but something I've been thinking about for a long time. An economically constrained land use change model. So that's also another piece that we need.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you. So I just have a quick question about having read through the scoping plan and the appendices, looking at the documentation. You're asking for specific information about particular models that are in there. Some of them are ones that you've developed in-house. And so I think what could be helpful to us as we're looking for our network is which named models in the appendix are you looking for more information on? All of them? Are there other models you have wanted to use that might replace current ones, and so that we can look a little further abroad for speakers?
Right. So, you know, the models that we use in the scoping plan and in other parts of CARB, honestly, I feel like we understand pretty well. We understand its limitations and its strengths and weaknesses and things like that. So in ag, this would be DayCent, DNDC. I feel like we have a decent handle on what they can do and what they can't do. So, you know, maybe, I don't know that we necessarily need an extra speaker on those models. Now, if there are other models that can do other things like, like I said, for the ag sector specifically, like scaling, we need to know what's going on across all of California. And those models are not super, designed for that. And then, coupling that with sensing. So, if there are like extra models, and maybe it's like when we get to this point of the discussion, we talk more about what sort of modeling gaps and data gaps exist. So then that can inform the speakers better that you might want to bring in. Or you can also just answer it yourself because you are also
There's quite some people on the committee who are familiar and skilled.
But then, an additional point I wanted to make about speakers too is like, I'd like to use space also to get like more varied voices in the room. So that is to say, just from different communities. And I know even like for modeling, data science work, you still bring yourself to these problems. So that's I just honestly, it's a challenge for the state. We don't have a good network of like diverse people that we can tap. And so if you had people that you knew about wherever they are in the US that can speak to these issues, I think it goes for all the topics actually that are like, have maybe different points of view than.
Hi, Jocelyn Hill.
So anyway, that was just another extra point. Justin.
Any questions online?
Hill.
Could people mute themselves if they're not speaking to the committee?
No worries. I wanted to close my corporate account.
Hello, could you guys please mute yourselves if you are a public attendee at the meeting in particular? We're hearing things you don't want us to hear.
I just don't need it anymore.
Okay,
I'm trying.
I'm managing this. Who can mute
I'm
them?
trying to, Kim.
Okay.
mute it.
Thanks. Any committee member on the remote want to make a comment around the expert speakers or modeling or any of the other aspects here? Seeing that, Melissa?
It's okay. I've done the same. It's okay. And then can you just remind, I know we can sort of nominate a speaker at any time, but in terms of like setting the agendas and so forth, like, is there a timeline that you're thinking about in terms of having some initial ideas for speakers that we might want to line up, and or how many weeks in advance we're going to want to have nominations if we wanted to have a guest speaker be a part of an upcoming meeting?
Yeah, I would suggest that we have identified, if possible, the universe of desired speakers as soon as possible. Like within the next 2 weeks, if you can all send in your recommendations. For now, that doesn't mean you might not have a stroke of brilliance 3 weeks from now and want to add to that, but to give some framing to that. And then we'll have a pool of speakers. We might not have space for everybody, or we might need to have shorter timeframes available to try and get everybody in there. But I would see no problem from my perspective of having an expert, having expert speakers at each of our meetings except the last one. Because with the assumption that we were going to be creating a deliverable, that last meeting would probably want to focus in pretty much on that and not have external speakers be part of that. So that would give another 4 meetings. And if we go back to our prior approach of having our meetings go from 10 to 4 or 10 to 5, we could have 2 to 3 speakers, expert speakers, do them justice and do the discussion justice. So something along those lines. But we don't necessarily, I mean, like I have 3 or 4 people I'm recommending in the forest arena. We don't need them all. I don't know who's going to say yes. So if you have multiple folks who can provide thoughtful perspectives on the questions you think need to be addressed, you can say, here are 4 people who could speak to this issue. See who comes. This is my first choice. That would be really helpful.
Yeah, Nathaniel's hand is up. Nathaniel, you want to come on camera or unmute yourself?
Sure. Last year, I felt like that we pushed, since we spent so much of the first part of the year kind of figuring out internal dynamics and priorities. We ended up pushing speakers and our own kind of internal talks kind of towards pretty late in the year, and I feel like that it would be nice to get speakers maybe a second round, or at least some capacity to come back to those speakers and ask revisory questions. I felt like that was missing last year. There was kind of the initial information from speakers was really useful, but then it would have been nice to have had another kind of go with them or go at the questions, but we just didn't have the time for it. And maybe that's irrelevant this year, just kind of given the fact that we are far ahead of the kind of the logistical component. And I don't have an answer for that, but that's just something I wanted to highlight that I kind of felt personally. Thank you.
So what I would suggest, Nathaniel, is if you might look over who those speakers were that you most felt would be useful for some of these questions, that would be great to send those in. And then that can go into the mix of folks to consider. That would be great.
Okay, thanks.
Is there anybody else? Again, I'm sorry, it's hard for me to see
There's no one else.
Adam, I'm gonna have to respectfully disagree, but they said DCM model might be user friendly, but we're not convinced the output is good.
Right, yeah. So let's talk about other models besides this.
Okay, all right,
Yeah.
very good.
and for example, you might be the best person to speak about. Or not. I mean, I'm not trying to put you on the spot.
No, I'm just saying that,
Yeah.
There's next year questioning.
Yes.
Yeah, said,
Well, and then additionally, along with that is like, okay, if we're thinking about modeling large scales, how can we validate this in any scientifically rigorous way, especially in agriculture? So I'm sure you've thought about this a lot. So you also need help thinking through that. Whatever model you choose.
We have a few more minutes before any public comment and a break. So if I were to take Laura's suggestion up, tentatively speaking, we agree that everybody on the committee will go through their mental Rolodex and think about speakers to recommend and get those in to Jen and me in the next 2 weeks. Secondly, we're agreeing on 5 meetings in person with potentially 2 fill-in options. And we'll try to space those out in a way which is workable, because we also have to work with the state schedule, like when the state folks are available, and so on. So it may not be everybody's first choice or desire, but taking those factors into account. And then thirdly, we're agreeing that there will be some form of report that we will deliver, whether it's delivered in sections that then are compiled into a final, or just one go. The form of that would be, but we're going to try to bring our thinking into a tangible, coherent form, which lives on either an electronic or paper page. And can be referred back. Going once, going twice. So, okay. Why don't we turn over then to, why don't we just take one section? Are folks interested in meeting outside of Sacramento? This is a great central location for many people, but it's not necessarily required. It would be helpful to know if there was a desire to meet elsewhere at all from a field perspective. I know it takes time for people, unless it happened to be to some person's campus in their lab, or some people's research site in their lab. But is there a desire to meet outside of Sacramento? Because that would just be helpful from a logistical perspective to know. Any thoughts?
Yeah, Christie's raising her.
Christy?
Well, to speak to Adam's comment, and Matt's brought this up numerous times before, I would like to see us have one meeting in a different urban area, so maybe Southern California, with a lot of outreach to try and get participants that might provide a different perspective. And I wonder if similarly we could have a meeting in an area where we're more likely to capture a number of different tribal participants from different tribes, like if there was going to be a Basket Weavers Association meeting or some other intertribal meeting in California that was likely to capture a large number of tribes. And maybe those could be two of the extra off cycle or something. I don't know. It's just a thought about how to incorporate getting more diverse perspectives on the process.
Thank you. Any other thoughts there? Laura?
Yeah, I guess I just support the suggestion, and it may be that if we, for example, we're gonna have a meeting in Southern California and had guest speakers that were addressing topics that might be most, very salient to Southern California, we would get engagement. I don't know, budget wise, what's possible though for the state. This might be.
I don't know either, and of course, it is a tighter budget year than last year. So I'm not sure, we have to explore what kind of funding might or might not be available. Great suggestions. Why don't we see if there's any public comment on this section, Jen or Adam?
Yeah, so any members of the public that want to weigh in on this item, item 2, please raise your hand. I don't see any at this point, Lori.
Okay. Well, then why don't we take a 10-15 minute break and return after that.
I think. There's just people that.
Yeah.
There's some issues I imagine. That's the. In the.
Understandable.
Well,
But if it works.
Yeah.
Ideas.
Yeah.
They have. There's no effort.
I don't want to. Actually, yeah. I mean, I was like.
And so, I think. Maybe that's work.
Yeah.
But other things.
So I think.
But I think for
It's very.
Maybe. But anyway, there's also.
And that's what I think. And then.
Oh, yes. Okay. Yeah, and.
So.
I mean, I guess
we'll work on this point, like creating some big.
I love it. Also, just want to say, as President mentioned, you know, we're having, you didn't show up, that's not there.
No, they didn't need me. Yeah.
You're almost associated. And so we'll be putting forward a proposal for your guys' consideration and that. And so if you're like, that's just not gonna work, you want to figure it out from there.
I think we didn't know in advance.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
100%.
And I mean, that's the thing we can think about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Oh,
So I think we just have that data, dump that stuff.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It will be based on our yeah. And I thought like, but you know, as we have this already done, like, so. In some cases, that will be underlining existing recommendation that already come forward, as you mentioned in the policy. Okay, congratulations, you know. I think that's, I mean, how. Like models. What that is.
I know, I got job.
I guess that's not.
Your recommendation versus the strategy.
In terms of arts, advance.
Right.
That's.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and whether they. So they do whatever.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So we went through that part.
There's. So when we have to use it, like in some cases. Yeah, I'm wrong. A lot of this.
Pretty good.
Yeah.
When it's our starting. Like just one of those forever. This is the truth for us.
You know. Yes. Yeah, it's like, and it's.
Okay. So what is the best?
So.
Yeah, because there's like.
They're just different.
Different
fields in that way.
So how's that? That's the one thing
It's also more different strategy.
that.
Those things. So those things.
What's in the administration?
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to.
Yeah.
They're just responding.
I was really pleased. Everyone's interest in Of course, it's not decided. But the fact that I should say that.
Yeah, and there are these sort of
Positive.
Let's do that.
As opposed to saying that.
Yeah. You enter the next thing, right?
Yeah, well, no.
Yes, they say that, yes. I think we're together. You said that those entities are probably. Yeah. Yeah.
Look to the north, look to the east.
Yeah, and all the.
So,
Yeah, that's something.
Cross my fingers for you. Yeah.
It was for the national work.
So.
I mean, it's important to do.
So. Okay.
Well, I would still.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, right, that's all wrapped in
Yeah.
together. I guess I don't separate. But I guess they should be separate.
Yeah, well, I guess. You know, so like. Yeah, because we're just like. Yeah. The board will develop the standard methods,
Right.
and then every 2 years thereafter, starting in January 1, 2025, resources will publish data, site development.
Yes. So
Talk to my friends, and they're like, yeah.
Yes. I was thinking.
Pick up our trash, it's like, who knows, we're in Louisiana. That's our drug thing. We gotta do this stuff. Yeah. Well, yeah. But everybody does not know. See some needs.
I mean, track.
Well, on the other hand,
You have to think about the right, or the vacation, it's like you said, these targets. So I had the more than last week, so all these times, track. So it's like.
Are not just.
It's so interesting, so, yeah, I'm gonna go, those,
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so what are the carbon outcomes?
Carbon.
Yeah, and co-benefits, and then what are the management actions? Yeah.
and it's an. I mean, we don't think it's a goal in Australia, it's pretty much. It's not, in many respects, it's kind of a research and enormous for these founders. So we have done. Yeah.
Hey.
Honors the only one who did the but it did, yes, and she being an American #1 feels just power to do something.
Right.
And then any results, and they're all looking at like, you want to do this,
Yeah.
and you can't do that.
It's just, yeah, that's fast.
Exactly. They want well line up. That's.
Yeah. But I think that's. And then I feel like. That even happens across the states. So we go to the US, I know, and it's just fascinating to hear
The challenges, in some cases, it's like, yeah, we're all these similar challenges, in other cases, like wildly different. Considerations
It's
having
still
kids that are just completely different. So there's yeah, from like a forest, everyone's not just completely different structures. On how they address these things, like in some cases, there's like one person who's doing that for their business, right? Who's in like a random department that like, and so different processes. Yeah, they're like, pretty much I'm working into this, so I'm like, there's a whole team. Hundreds of people. Yeah. So, yeah.
Well, it is. What do you think would have to change or to do that here?
There was a proposal to do that. So it sounds like the actual. Oh, thank you. I mean, it's a great change. Oh. Although I was like, I think I can do this. So. We're gonna say anything else. Yeah, yeah.
That'll work.
And then we'll see that goes on their website, I've said, go back.
Serious, I don't know enough.
Great. That's right. All of that.
In the discussions.
Oh, interesting. Okay, that's great. That's awesome. Yeah.
Okay.
And also, like, I'm like, on our website, but giving modules that says like 40 meetings per year. So
there was a short amount of time, but yeah, and it's not feedback.
yeah, or you could just say let's set for.
Yeah.
We're just, we're with that.
I think it's also. He said, to bring that up later, to share once gets staff on board. I think that some of it will not be able to be fully, you know.
It's.
This will be captured.
Right.
And then, as we said,
Right.
they
can watch it.
You can watch it.
Yeah.
We'll just run out of time.
Right.
And I remember, it's just personal. Lost away.
Yeah.
So we can, have a running basis.
If he knows what's going on.
Everybody has.
There was a.
Yeah.
They were very perfect, like they were testing.
Had a fact.
Fine, but I was like, let's go.
Wasn't there.
And then.
I was just like, it's gonna be hard.
I had to interview twice. That happened for my current job. Yeah, they failed the search.
But anyway, I thought it was interesting.
Well, this one.
It is. Never heard a good thing. That was one else.
You are not legally allowed. We were trying to put it advertised. You're gonna have a sponsor for this.
So I get this.
Yeah. That's.
Yeah, maybe it's just outside of it. I mean, you probably presentation.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't need to be up there.
Well, that's exciting now.
Yeah.
We had some time though.
We actually have members of the public.
I sort of feel like 2 years.
You're all like this same.
Trying to collect tickets, you know. So like one more year, you could feel like, hello.
You know how I am, yeah.
You're making a progress, I'm ready to. No. You don't.
Yes.
Oh, that's right.
Too much about this.
With another person.
Okay, this is advance warning that we're about to begin again. So for the members of the committee, if you could signal that you are who are online, if you could signal that you are engaged. So on motion, Christie, John is indicating, Arian is there, Nathaniel is traveling, so and okay, and then Melissa is also remote. We have our form, so why don't we begin again? The segment we're entering into here is around the climate smart land strategy, and I wanted to just open this with revisiting the executive summary that we produced from our last report, where we were trying to, in one short paragraph, flag the most important elements for people who only had 30 seconds to look at something. And then that went to a 2-page executive summary, which elucidated these things further. And then we went into our cross-sectional recommendations and then by section. And this structure is not necessarily what we might want to adopt going forward, but I just wanted to flag this as a way of encapsulating, the so what of the work from last year. And for anybody who wants to go online to look at the report more fully again, we have the website for that. But in introducing this next section of our meeting, I wanted to turn to Amanda to say, number one, thank you for the opportunity to work with you on this. Number two, could you tell us where the state is in its process of developing its response to 1757? And then maybe you can lead us into the climate smart land strategy.
Yes, happy to. Number one, thank you all for your work. It was incredible, and we're very excited to have worked really hard, like spreadsheet kind of mapping what the recommendations that came in were and how they're reflected in the set of targets that we built out. And so really hopeful that when we do release them, you can really see yourselves in that work. So just really want to express our appreciation, and also for hitting the deadline, which obviously we didn't quite do on our end. Just to share that, we reached a point where it was like, either we rush this and they're not as good as we know that they can be, they're not as solid, or we essentially take the time that we think it requires to get these in the shape that we want them to be in for such a momentous kind of climate first. And that's how we're really thinking about this, is that we've never put forward targets in this space. As far as we know, no other state in the nation has put forward as comprehensive a set of targets as we are considering. And so, we really want to get this right. So we're at the tail end of our process in terms of finalizing the targets. And so, I'm like reluctant to give a time frame, just because it kind of, they're still in review, and it kind of depends on what comes back, and oh gosh, we have to sort of rework something. So I'm nervous about putting out a timeline, but I do want to say that they're very far along. And we think that they're in very good shape. So that's really the update that I can share with all of you at this point. And just to, again, say, you know, we really appreciate you hitting the timeline. That was like the latest we could possibly have gotten it to then kick into our effort. And I know it was still like not a lot of time to do what you delivered. So really appreciate it. And I would also say that there may be a couple of places where we do follow up with a question on, you know, something that emerged where, you know, if we were still looking at January 1, it would be like, oh, well, yeah, don't have time to ask like for a follow-up on that. So just to put that out there, that in some cases there may be a couple questions that we asked around some of the recommendations that came forward. So does anyone else want to weigh in on that? Did I miss anything for the targets update?
Can you speak to what is the review process you have?
Yeah, so I laid this out at a previous meeting. I'm happy to do it again. The way that we are sort of structure our reviews in state government, or at least in California state government, is we have like the staff level, which is kind of me, and then everyone who works on this issue build out the targets and then review them, often several times, because once changes come in, we want to send it back out. Okay, 32, etc. Once it gets to the point where it's pretty clean and neat and tight at my level in terms of review, we will bump it up to what we call a principal level review, which is like agency secretaries. And then once it's been signed off by agency secretaries, it will go to the governor's office. And so, you know, it's not necessarily always like that linear. And so I would say, you know, we're at the point where we're still kind of syncing up on principal and staff. So more to come, but that's where we are. Yeah.
It might help people, if you could mention, I believe you said you had something like 50 governmental entities contributing into the process, just to give a sense of the complexity of things.
Yeah, it's in addition to our agency, it's 15 other agencies that we're coordinating with. And in some cases, it's multiple like points within that agency. So I don't have like a total number of entities, but it's a lot. And what's interesting too is, you know, as we've built these out, you know, something that I'm particularly proud of is that we've all worked really hard with counterparts across the administration who, quite honestly, it required like several phone calls of like, what is this? And how does it relate to our work? It's, oh, okay. And then now I need to sit with that. And now I need to think about who else in my agency needs to like be brought in on this. And so I view it as a very positive thing that, you know, we're engaging with all of these entities who are saying, yeah, we want to contribute. We want to put our best foot forward in the process. But yes, it does take a lot of time. I'd say it's worth it. Okay. Shall I dive into? Okay. We have prepared a slideshow for everyone, and Plessy and I are going to do this presentation together. Sweet. Thank you. And basically, we're just going to kind of kick off with, you know, yes, we've got to update the climate smart strategy. And we really are aiming for January 1st on this one, because this is something, this is an update. It's not the very first time it's been done. We've already been there and done that. So, you know, we believe that a lot of this is going to be kind of sharpening a couple of key areas of focus. But I'm going to let Plessy get into that. I'm just going to start with like a refresher of like how it's structured now, what is in it now. So that when we go over our approach to the update, you all can kind of understand, like, oh, I see the difference of what they're talking about. So next slide. State landscapes, y'all are very familiar with this. We're not planning on shifting these for the purpose of the next strategy update. So, you know, we move on. Next slide. The sort of overall goals of the 2022 strategy were like, wow, we do a lot of stuff in this sector. We don't ever like talk about it as a sector. So let's let's make this a sector. Let's bring all the pieces together. Also, and this is still a problem, people don't really know what nature-based solutions are. It doesn't like evoke, we don't have, I think there's so many advocates for this work, and I just don't think that they necessarily see themselves in this sector yet. And so one of the things that we really wanted to do is help people understand what are nature-based solutions, why are they valuable, how do they actually deliver on climate. It's not like some sort of like, you know, woo-woo greenwashing thing. There's like actual climate benefits here. So wanted to help lay that out very clearly. And I think that's still a top priority. Yeah, goal of the strategy is like guide action. So this is what we want to see more of. We want to be directional with this document. And of course, just kind of being very clear that this is yet another opportunity in our climate agenda to ensure that when we're taking these climate actions, we're considering how can they also drive on equity? How can they also expand, increase opportunity for Californians? And then the last was really just taking like the first step in what is a very challenging piece of the puzzle, which is how do we track action? How do we measure progress? Next slide. Lots of agencies contributed to the development of the strategy, which is why when we went to target time, a lot of agencies were like, oh, yep, okay, got it. Others maybe less so, but I was very pleased. We had done a lot of the work kind of laying out the foundation of what this is with a lot of these different entities. So just to flag, it's a broad set of partners. Next slide. I'll just tick through the basic sections of the strategy. We have the intro that really, I think, is what if you had an executive summary, you know, like, what is this? Why does it matter? That's what we attempted to do with the introduction here. And also, you know, just lay out some of the basics of how we divided up California and what for the purposes of this section. Next slide. Another thing that we realized could be valuable to people is to help kind of summarize what is it that we're already doing in this space? Because again, it was kind of siloed off and, you know, wetland stuff over here and forest stuff over here. And so really did a very concrete approach where an appendix to the strategy is actually every single thing that we think we can tally that state agencies are doing to advance this agenda, but then we summarize it in the strategy itself. Next slide. Okay, so then this is where we get into what I think of as like really kind of the heart of this strategy, which is describing for each landscape, what is it that the way that we manage these lands can actually deliver. And so we walk through these 5 different sort of descriptions or elements of a climate benefit that for each of the landscapes individually they could contribute. Next slide. Again, for each of the landscapes, we then listed what are our priority nature-based solutions. What do we want to see more of that we know there's going to be really strong climate benefits? And this is just a snapshot of one of the lists. I will just say, you know, the suite of priority nature-based solutions for each of the 8 landscape types, there's roughly between like 4 and 10, 4 and 8, except for the developed land sector, where we had, I think, like 24. And so I want to just put out there for the group and for the public and anyone else who's hearing, that was super intentional from my perspective, because it's part of that, like, what does this mean for me? How does this help my life? Why should I do this? To really drive home the point that there's a lot of opportunity, not in wild places, but in places where we live, that can deliver climate benefits and how people kind of see themselves as part of this agenda. Next slide. We also have maps for each of the landscape types. We show people where are those lands based on our the latest data that we have. Next slide. In the last strategy, we did so much public engagement to inform the development strategy. First time we've ever done this. We did alongside our partners who developed 30 by 30, the Pathways 30 by 30 document. And so really felt like we had very rich input from regions across California on their natural and working lands and their priorities for climate action in the sector. And so wanted to reflect that in some meaningful way, but also as like a tool for anyone who's like, oh, I live in this region, like what's the breakdown of my natural working lands sort of land types? Where might we want to focus our attention because we've got lots, etc. So we had a regional sort of snapshot where we summarized like what do we hear in those engagements and you know, who owns what land for that region, et cetera. So just like a useful little regional snapshot. Next slide. And then this was the chapter where we really tried to kind of take a first step in understanding kind of what the lay of the land was for tracking action and measuring outcomes. Next slide. And then the last section was laying out, okay, what are the state's near-term priorities? What are we going to be driving on in the near term to advance our nature-based solutions agenda? And we lay out kind of a set of actions that we committed to be focused on in the near term. Next slide. Okay, and now I'm going to hand off to Presley, who's going to walk you guys through our approach to the 2025.
Thank you. So for the 2025 update, we are going to keep a lot of the structure and sections that were in the 2022 strategy, but make some adjustments to reflect what has happened since, and speak to some of the language in 87 and 57. So we are going to update those sections on priority actions. This is what Amanda referred to as the heart of the strategy. It says landscape specific sections where we are identifying priority nature-based solutions. So we want to update those with any science that has come out since the 2022 update and refine any of those specific solutions to progress. We're also going to be updating the landscape maps. You all saw a snapshot of one of them with newer land cover data that has come out. We'll be taking the next step in improving our approach, refining our approach on tracking and measuring outcomes. We're going to be identifying barriers to implementation and solutions to overcome them. We talked a lot about this. This is obviously in the bill. This will be a new section. This is not included in the 2022 strategy. And we see this section kind of slotting in for that regional section. We're not planning to do engagement by regions, and I'll get to that in a second. So this will be a new section that replaces that one. And then lastly, we will have a section that summarizes what we've done and what has happened in the space since 2022, and lay out new near-term priorities for action going forward. And this section, along with an updated appendix, will take the place of that existing efforts section. So we'll include what's new from 2022 to now here, and then update that appendix. That's really our view of everything we're doing as an nature-based solutions agenda. Next slide. So a little bit about the process and the timeline. We're going to be kicking off the strategy publicly with a webinar next week, at the end of next week. And then throughout the month of February, we will be soliciting public input. This will be through 8 workshops that are geared toward the landscapes. And we'll also be offering an opportunity to provide written input during this month. We'll also be conducting tribal engagement throughout this spring, and hopefully releasing our first draft strategy in June. This will be followed by public comment period in June and July, as well as tribal consultation and tribal roundtables again. And we'll go through all of the review process that I'm on the way earlier to meet our deadline of January 2025. Next slide. So these are the specific dates of our public workshops that will be held from 12 to 1 p.m. If you're interested in attending, the registration links are on the website on the Nature-Based Solutions page. You can also send those to anyone who may be interested in attending. Next slide. All right, so this is when we'd like to open it up for discussion. We're starting with one idea of input we'd love to have from you all to inform that new section on identifying barriers to implementation and solutions on how to overcome them. This also specifically speaks to that piece in 1757 around barriers. And our idea for timing was in July to really give us time to incorporate this into the final strategy and, have it in time for our review process. Do you have anything else to add?
Couple of small things. I would just say on the workshops that we're organizing, that are organized by Landtype, the goal, like, it's not going to learn anything new there. This is where we're really going to open the floor for people to weigh in. And so just wanted to make that clear. Like, that's the goal, is to really get input from the public. Second is to say that I think we were really intrigued when we got the report from you all last year. Like, wow, actually, a lot of this stuff is going to inform the strategy as well. And so just want to kind of point out that, like, that's not unseen. And so to the extent that, in some cases, like, yeah, well, we've identified the key barriers. We're already here to lay them out. Like, yes, and we are absolutely tracking that. So I think, as you think about whether this time frame is feasible, that's another consideration of, like, have you already done some portion of this work, in which case maybe it is more feasible. And lastly, the other point on the mid-July timeframe is just because, I think, yes, in the bill, this expert advisory committee is specifically tapped with helping us sort of inform the section on barriers and solutions. But the benefit of this timeframe is you've been able to see the draft. Maybe you guys have other thoughts that you'd like to share that would inform the final strategy, in which case this would be an opportunity to weigh in more broadly, if that's of interest.
So can I just clarify? You would be thinking of more internal drafts being done beginning of July 2024. Is that what that timeline said?
No, we will have a draft out for public comment in June and July.
Okay.
Maybe a little into August, TBD. Like, these are.
Yeah, I'm just wondering this stuff for time.
Yeah, and so we're hoping that by the end of July, we have public input, we have your input. We can start finalizing the strategy based on that input to get it done by the end of the year.
Good to build in that little room, I understand.
It gets taken away immediately, but yes.
Yes, it's good.
We all know,
Yeah. Okay.
About the first component, identifying barriers to implementation. Is there, there's lots of restrictions on access to data about people, but is there anonymized data that we could have access to look at who is accessing programs and thinking through with respect to that and how they're using the programs and what our recommendations were from the first round? So like, we might read in a paper that certain people don't have access, but we don't necessarily know the data that we're used to make that statement is, or if it's current. And is that something that your agencies are doing to look at? Is that something that's not within our purview to examine the population data about who's using programs and what's not? Does that make sense what I'm trying to ask?
So. I think what you're saying is, like, we want one barrier that we've heard of, that you've heard about, is lack of access. And so the question is, like, is that accurate or not? And then the more specific question is there anonymized?
Like, is it, well, I'm just trying to think of, like, how do we get access to that? So we can't really know who's provided the data, but do we know regionally if it's different populations are accessing certain programs differently, or
I
mean, I don't know, certain practices being utilized more, and we really think there's a carbon advantage to one, but it's not being accessed as readily as we think it should, or that, so how do we, if we really want to store carbon or reduce greenhouse gas emissions from our systems?
When you say access though, do you mean like awarded, or do you mean like
Yeah,
they, like that's,
yeah, I guess I mean, that, well, that's a good question, I guess is twofold, but who has access to it in terms of even getting the award, but then what practices are they choosing? Because the programs that I'm familiar with don't tell someone what to use. There's just a menu of what they could use to use. So like if Will's identified in organic systems that research has shown that like these particular suite of practices allow us to get this certain outcome in the climate smart land use strategy that is desired, and we aren't seeing people go that route. Why, and do we need to do something to encourage that outcome? Does that make sense?
yeah, I'm flipping it in my head though, of like, why would you need to go to the data rather than just make the recommendation that you should really focus on these practices and cut those? I don't know,
I can see that. I can see that. I think it's probably just, I feel like I can't say what people should do if I don't know what they're already doing, but I think if you're okay with that, then I could do that.
Oh, I mean, I would say like, if your charge is to really kind of identify recommendations for like, one barrier is there's like this large I'm making up what I think you said. One barrier is there's this very large menu of options, and you know, it's not clear what people actually do with it. And when we look at that menu of options, we think that there's things on there that are less valuable than others. And so we want to like propose splitting them up into tier 1 and tier 2 or something like that. I mean, literally something like that. But like,
Okay,
yes,
that's what I'm
asking.
asking. Like, do you? Yeah.
I am a little nervous about the data question because I'm like, I wouldn't even know where to begin with that. But we could look into it.
So what I'm hearing is that if you had data that in the Imperial Valley, there was a 5% uptake of organic practices, whereas in Madera County, there was 25% uptake of organic practices, that might be helpful for saying, okay, we're looking at this. How do we encourage this for Imperial Valley? What might this vary? That's kind of what I'm hearing. Yeah. Or like with wetlands, a huge barrier is we don't have the basic data about what's restorable. So it's not a barrier that people can't, access a particular computer for a program to apply. It's that we just don't know.
Right.
So we might not have thought of that as a barrier to implementation. Right. But it is a big barrier to implementation to doing wetland restoration for significant carbon sequestration. I think Adam had his hand up, and I'm not sure about online.
Yeah, just one source of information where you can get who or where projects are being done is from our climate change investment group at CARB, which funds a lot of the projects anyways, even though they're distributed through other agencies. So, and I know they have a lot of different, there's like a explicit map which shows where projects are done, and then there's information associated with each point. I don't know exactly how much information there is. I know that equity is a big concern for CCI, so I would assume they'd have something going maybe internally. I don't know that it would be external, but anyway, you can Google that and there's information. And that's not everything that's going on, right? That's just funded by cap and trade in those programs, but that's one place to start.
Yeah, and I think that anything that was a state grant program is considered pretty public. Like I just went into our health and soils program awards, and you can see who got what award, where they live, what practice they were planning to apply, how many acres, estimated GHG reductions, what ag system it was. So that's just on our website. But if it's not a grant program and there was some other mechanism of implementing something that might be harder, we might not have data.
And another idea is like for these bigger lift things, also welcome, like you guys should look into this. That could be the recommendation. Like you need to dig in and explore whatever. We don't have time to do that by deadline we're operating, but this is gonna, you know,
Or you should collect data on
yeah, something.
Yes, I wanted to dig in the related area here a bit and ask who you see as the audience for this going forward, who's been the audience thus far. And I think when you started this review of this, you pointed out the developed plans and an explicit idea that a lot of people could see themselves in the solution set by looking at that very long list of things that you could be doing, and that's great. But alternatively, some of the things we've been talking about now about recommendations of digging in is that some of those are going to have bigger impacts than others. And one of the things the audience that we could be envisioning with this document are you guys, agencies or legislators that could be imposing policies like providing incentive money to do G rather than K.
Yep.
And that would require some knowledge. And I think the kinds of recommendations on the different sectors that we would be giving depends a lot on who you see as the audience, this document, and whether it's going to be an effective document with respect to stimulating things like policy change and incentivizing option G over K, whatever.
Yeah, I would not call it like the state agencies, the audience, because this is their commitment. Like this is our state policy. This is what we're saying is driving our action in the sector. And so yes, like when this was finalized, we walked a lot of state partners through. These are the priority research that we want to see more of. So like in your grant guidelines, please refer back to these.
I mean, doing a lot of these 20 things isn't very helpful. Like in the urban, helping people do green gardens or green roofs, those are all great things to do. Just having that list isn't very specific. So any agency that has the potential to do something, and say, yeah, we help people get some green gardens. And you're going to look back and say, well, is that the right thing to do? Is that an addition to do? Or should we have instead been working on school? Yeah.
I would just flag that in our report, we went through the effort to winnow down to what we thought were the most important, or most impactful. Not most important, but most impactful from the point of view of carbon emissions and sequestration and co-benefits and equity. That we had that list. So we did do some of that already.
Yeah.
So one thought for us all is that as we are looking at the draft that I've seen Amanda share with Virginia and others providing their input is, and there were a number of ideas that we left on the cutting room floor, if you will. Look at what they are recommending and say, well, gosh, why did they, from our knowledge, this would be much more impactful. Let's go back to them and say, hey, you should do, from our perspective, you should do X more. And that's primary, and then these are secondary, and these are tertiary. So we're not saying eliminate things, but what I'm hearing you say is, how do you give the most impactful direction here? And that's what I'm hearing back from Amanda, that would be helpful.
Yeah, and I think that some of that it depends on where you see the audience, right? So if the audience is and I'm sure the audience to some extent is a little bit of all of the above, right? So the general public reading this and saying, oh, I could do that, or NGOs saying I could do that, or city government saying I can do that, or state government saying. Those are different kinds of things and maybe responses to different kinds of recommendations. And so just that as you go along, any guidance on who you are striving to impact and how. What's the theory of change that?
Build on his question a little bit, Mark's question. So with 1757, there was a kind of primacy of carbon sequestration or reduction of CO2 emissions. If other elements, we as a committee said, we're not just doing carbon, we're doing climate. This is the climate smart land strategy. So if I'm wondering if there's a little bit of a dialing up of the broader climate implications, inclusive of carbon, but not limited to them. But adaptation is a major one, and within adaptation, water security is a major one. You know, walking through that, is there something in there that shifts our emphasis?
No, because overall, you're gonna look at climate writ large, mitigation and adaptation. And this strategy, it also looks at both. How can the way we manage our lands deliver on a carbon neutrality goal and net zero, and how can the way we manage our lands increase, reduce climate risks and build our long-term resilience?
I'm just interested, this is going to take us off topic from this particular section, but I'm interested. You said as one of the updates that you all are looking to advance your approach to tracking action and measuring outcomes in the sector. And I'm just wondering if you could, if there's any more you could share about what you're envisioning there.
Yeah, I mean, we're building out what I would call like the next step. So it's not going to be like transformational. It's all going to be like, and here's our like whiz bang MRV system. Like that's not going to happen because we're just not there yet. But I think like we've certainly evolved in our discussions as like a policy team and thinking about what is the next step? Like what are sort of, how can we advance this conversation? And so I think that's as much as I can say in terms of setting expectations is like, it's the next step from our baby step in the first strategy. That's really our goal is to be thinking about, okay, how have we done this in other sectors? What does that mean? What does that look like for this sector? What are constraints? What are, particular challenges, et cetera? Just kind of laying out with a little more detail. Sorry, that's all.
Actually, this is sort of a natural follow-up to a question that I had a little bit earlier. I think it relates to the regions, but it sounds like the regions are sort of coming out of this version of the report, so maybe not as relevant there. But I was wondering, there's been this sort of big push with the Wildfire and Forest Resilience Task Force to sort of create resources that are, I think, aligned with the, all of this work. And I guess I'm just wondering if you could say a little bit more about how sort of that effort and all of the outreach and they have these regional resource kits and there's sort of like a lot of engagement associated with that process, like how this process intersects with that and the degree to which any recommendations from the advisory panel associated with that task force like should or could intersect with what we're doing, because both are dealing with land. And originally that was very much focused on forest, but it's become like all land, maybe with the exception of urban. I don't know the degree to which that they've been focusing so much in the developed lands. But in any case, anyway, if there feels like a bit of intersection here, and I'm not quite sure yet, despite being on both advisory panels, how we're supposed to interact and intersect and like how you all are thinking about that.
Well, okay, so I'll take a step back and say at the beginning of the slides, I noted that like we had a lot of stuff going on in the sector that just didn't see themselves as part of a broader nature or natural living sector. And so when we pulled the strategy together, our job was not to reinvent the wheel. It was to really like wrap our arms around the existing efforts of subject matter experts across our agencies that were already underway. And so like we worked very closely with Patrick and the task force team to make sure, and I'll just talk about the 2022 document, to make sure that they informed the priority nature-based solutions, that they signed off on like the final set that went forward, that they reflected the task force sort of goals and interests. And so, similarly with the OPC team, we work with them super closely because it's really their work, but we're not driving those specific pieces. We're kind of really serving as like a platform to showcase their work and elevate their work as part of a broader sector. So to answer your question, we do a lot of that coordination internally when we develop the strategy. And part of the reason we put the draft out and want to, and really appreciate putting the draft out is that we get a lot of really helpful comments of like, oh, you missed that. Like, oh, yeah, we did. Okay, so we catch like tons of really helpful feedback on where we sort of missed the mark. But it's a long-winded way of saying we try to do a lot of that work internally, and we rely on our partners externally to let us know where we slipped up during the drafting period.
So just thinking, okay, so just to follow up then, as we're sort of going forward with this next iteration of the climate smart strategy, is the expectation then that at least for the sectors that that task force is focused on, that they will be also feeding into and sort of considering updates needed in some of these. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And yeah.
And I believe that timeline has slipped a fair bit.
Which timeline? Oh, for.
It's moving back a little bit.
Not sure which
So don't worry.
exact.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I agree on like the regions. It's, you know, welcome ideas if you all think that there's value in retaining that section or like retaining a component or something, right? You know, we're just open to ideas if that's.
Yeah, I mean, my main thought there before you said that part was coming out was just that the regions don't look exactly the same as the regions that the task force is using.
Oh, yeah.
And so there's like some similarities, but there are very clear differences also. And so I was just thinking like, gosh, that's confusing, like depending on your audience. Right. And especially given all the effort they put into these regional resource kits, which were intended to provide all this public input anyway. So I was just sort of thinking, oh gosh, this is like, so maybe just backing away from regions within this iteration, I think could be, yeah, exactly.
So, were you going to stop at this one and then go on to next sections, or should we talk about whether or not July is a feasible time frame?
This was the last slide we have, so I would say we can move on to that.
Okay, because there is is that mid-July for the entire report or more for the new section on identifying barriers to implementation?
It would be for any input on. And, you know, from our perspective, like the floor is how do we do on barriers and solutions to those barriers, but are open to input on more than that. And so
just mention that this is different from any input that you all would want to give on those other pieces of 1757 that we talked about earlier that could potentially go into one final report, so input on the modeling, standard accounting, those pieces are part of this meeting. That wouldn't have to come up.
So just to clarify, priorities in that primary, secondary, tertiary way. Barriers or solutions to barriers. Because you don't necessarily need us to identify a barrier if we have a solution, or if we have a solution that there's no known barrier to it. It's just like, hey, has anybody thought about this before? The barrier was nobody had thought about this before. So just kind of those three pieces. So why don't we see about committee response on this? I mean, assuming that these are kind of tiered assumptions. So if you're done in June and you release it, that gives us 6 weeks. If you're done in the end of June and you give us, if 2 weeks is kind of hard to turn around.
if we slip on our deadline, everything.
Okay. Just checking with that.
Is it possible to work towards providing, right? So there's like the reactionary approach where we wait and review what they put out, but then there's like a proactive approach where we come up with barriers, for instance, that the population of barriers that we could put forward beforehand.
We thought about that. We were like, it would be really great if we could just get that in the draft and then did we get it right? No, fix it later. No, that's not gonna be feasible because we would need it by March. So we were just like, that's not fair. You can't jam them. And like we said, we did see a lot of things that identified in what you've already provided to us. So we just felt like, okay, let's not jam them on time. Let's incorporate what we've seen and then go from after the draft. That's why we did.
Or were you just stretching?
Well, I have like a half thought, so I'm not gonna start it yet.
Can we stimulate any questions on our virtual side here? Because I know it's always kind of a challenge when you're staring at a box. But Christy or Marian or Nathaniel or John or Melissa, if you have any questions or thoughts or concerns here, that would be great to pull that input out now.
The only thing I was gonna say, this is Christy, is I wasn't seeing that we would have to wait until the public draft in June to work on barriers to implementation and solutions. Like we could use the information that's in the current strategy and what we've learned and maybe, reports from speakers so that we were outlining what we thought it was and then ground truth that against what comes out in June. But maybe that's not the right approach, but then you're not saying, oh, the public draft comes in June and we're all of a sudden responding by mid-July.
Yeah, I second that. I 100% agree. I think we can absolutely start working on that piece ahead of time, and it'll help us get to that deadline. I think in a less rushed way as well.
Maybe it's just me, but maybe it's just me, but I'm in the vein, but I'm just not understanding how all the community's efforts then integrates at the end of the year into this.
So can somebody repeat that comment? I couldn't hear it.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. If you shout, that's lovely. At least for us on the phone.
I was concerned. I have a little vagueness in my mind. I don't understand how these products come together into this integrated outcome for our effort here.
Right. So I think there's several products that your efforts are feeding into. One is the targets, another is the updated strategy. There's also the work to inform the modeling, et cetera. And something that we talked about with the committee last year is, having everything pulled together into, sort of complete set of the work that this committee has done and delivered. And so while I don't see all the work feeding into exactly the same products, it will all feed into some particular deliverable called for in AB 1757. And we're going to make sure that all of those pieces are sort of reflected in one final deliverable that, we're going to try to get designed, et cetera, at the end. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
So I have a question, comment, and then I'm looking at the last one and the third section, tracking action and measuring outcomes, isn't organized by those 8 ecosystem units, right? It's more general. And I'm anticipating that the new section, identifying barriers, will also not be organized by those 8 units. We made that decision, not yet. But it does seem to me that we probably need to think about how we go about commenting on those sections of an updated strategy, given our siloing it into this 8 units. So in thinking about development plans, I could be thinking about tracking actions and measuring outcomes, and they then in your writing of it would have to be sort of generalized, integrated across these things. So I'm wondering, as a comment to us, do we think about how we structure ourselves for?
So, I mean, how we addressed that in the last report was cross-cutting. And there were a variety of cross-cutting observations / recommendations that were provided. So would that work?
I think so, but I think that if we, my recollection of the allocation of effort was that the cross-cutting thing was done quickly at the end because that's the time we had. And I think that we should be planning on that taking more time.
Yeah, I think the last time though, it was because these were things that were coming out of every group. Yeah, so we could see it that way.
Yeah.
And until we had every group's stuff, we couldn't really see it that way.
Yeah.
So I don't think that it was a jam. I think it was derived from what was already proposed.
Yeah.
But I would say wherever you have thoughts or recommendations, start capturing them and bring them forward. And there's some things you're clearly going to be like if you're tracking the amount of organic production of berries, for example. Well, that's going to be probably fairly specific to that. If you're trying to measure uptake of certain practices that are considered to be the most harmful. And I'm only picking those because of the pesticide fungicide issues, that's all. And other things are going to be much more cross-sectional, like tracking number of acres that are dedicated to remaining as grasslands, new grasslands or shrublands. So that might be cross-cutting. So we'll see what emerges there is one from my perspective.
I guess I'm that a lot of that cross-country cutting stuff fell on feet at the end, but doing it this time, we might want to budget more time. There's clearly a place where there's two places now where that is going to become.
And just to answer your question, like, we don't exactly know how either. And it's gonna depend on what we hear from the public and then what we hear from everybody once we put a draft out of like, why is it organized like this? Should be like that. Oh, yeah.
Right.
So we had the same question. The TVs.
Yeah. Well, I think inevitably, I don't know about you guys, but the first quarter's already gone in my mind. So this is something that.
Oh, it's a member of the public, so we'll get to that.
Sorry, go ahead. Quarter's already done.
Thank you for flagging that. Sometimes hard to see, but the time here will pass rather quickly. And knowing that everybody here has another life or several in the background, the sooner we can set up our meetings and the sooner we know a little bit more. We might want to, for example, at a next meeting, have reviewed the work we did last year that considered barriers and solutions and which ones we decided not to include, which ones we did include, and have a conversation about, okay, is this, does this reflect our conversations well? And reiterating that in our own minds so that we can start to get a head start on where we feel those top priorities, secondary priorities, tertiary priorities, and barriers are. Because sometimes the barriers that we identified, or the pathways that we identified, were not necessarily tied to the top priority. Maybe because we didn't identify all the barriers therein. Or, one of the things that's inevitable, a lot of what we recommended required money, but not everything. And some of it may be deprioritized. So we may want to be thinking about some of those things, like from a process perspective, how to make things easier within agencies. My favorite is when I went to John Blair many, many moons ago and said, have you ever heard of the common application process for college? How about we have a common application process for the 103 different grant programs that you have? Those are things that you can just do. And there's simply a barrier because if somebody has to write 10 proposals to get a new initiative started, or they just have to write one and it cuts across your multiple agencies. maybe it doesn't cost a lot of money. It's not terribly sexy, but it makes life easier. So. I'm sorry?
Just that IT costs a lot of money in the state. It's not.
So it could be a money saver.
They're all nodding.
Yeah. Well, of course, if there are solutions that you all think quietly, it would be helpful if we amplified, please let us know. How to make your lives easier. Is that? Yeah. Other thoughts from the committee, because we're having, this would be a, yes, we can do it by mid-July, assuming you get this to us by June 1. Or is that the committee, basically you're saying we will give you 6 weeks.
Well, I think what we're saying is we would like your input by mid-July.
But if you don't give it to us until July
I
1.
think she's saying that if she gets it before, like if we can get a head start.
No, all I'm saying is,
I think, I'm sorry, because I don't remember the name of the committee member who spoke, but the idea that you have to wait until the draft, I think that is not how we were thinking about this.
We should start.
We were thinking, they need time to actually identify, what did we already say? What, everything that you just said, except I would not imagine that's feasible in 6 weeks.
Well, my concern is that you will have an integrated whole draft at some point. The sum of our recommendations that we've done is not necessarily going to encompass the sum of what you present in your draft. I would suspect that the committee would appreciate a chance to give some thoughtful consideration to that. And therefore, that there's not just 2 weeks to do that. That's my point.
Yeah, we would not.
Okay.
Not June.
Okay. So with that in mind, that mid-July, this going back to the timeline that Kelsey put up there that said, in June, we'll be releasing our draft. And I'm just trying to create some clarity about if for whatever unanticipated reason, that draft is not available until June 20th.
Yeah, everything would shift.
Okay, great.
100%. Public comment has to be, we have to give people time for public comment and for you all to review. It's just bad.
It sounds like no matter what time it is, we get about 6 weeks.
Ish. I mean, ideally it would be 8 to read.
Yeah.
No less than 6. Okay.
6 to 8 weeks going once, going twice. Okay,
Yeah,
no, that's
and
great.
this is part of why, like, your comment
Yeah.
about, like, what did I say? Like, we're already writing. Like, we know how long it takes to get stuff out the door. And so our goal was to give people lots of time to talk.
Sure. With that in mind, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, so then in terms of speakers, we've been talking about potentially bringing some speakers specifically related to the barriers component. So we probably want to start that sooner than later. Yeah. So thinking about putting something together even before we see the draft. Yeah.
So do we have consensus on the committee that we will work within this timeline? I'm seeing lots of head nods. Is there anybody online in virtual world that feels differently? Not seeing anything there. So yes, we will provide those recommendations on that timeline.
There, Lori, this is Marianne. I want to flag, there's a hand up. Elena, a guest. I don't know what that is, but just flagging that right now.
Yeah, we'll do public comment at the end of this. So Elena, thanks for keeping your hand up. We'll get to you.
Is there anything else, Leslie, that you want to, or Amanda, that you want to flag in terms of the update for the strategy and any other discussion? If not, we will move to public comment earlier than not.
I don't think so. Thank you.
Chad or Adam? All right, well then, let us move to public comment.
Okay, Elena, I'm not sure if you have public comment, but oh, there you are.
Yeah, sorry. I think I raised my hand prematurely. I mostly just want to introduce myself because I see a lot of potential synergies here. My name's Elena Bishek. I'm the new Ag Program Manager at CARCD, and I'm also the statewide coordinator of the regional RCD Ag and Climate Hubs, which are kind of expanding on the work of the North Coast RCD Soil Hub, but we have a focus on scaling ag and climate solutions across ag lands that RCDs work with. So in terms of this barrier section that you all are talking about, I just want to mention that we're working on now developing this regional needs and opportunity assessment that I think could fit in well with maybe some of the information y'all are looking for about like technical assistance barriers, especially, you know, at RCDs. So I just want to mention that and go from there.
Thank you. Is there anything else?
Any other public comment? If so, you can raise your hand or turn your camera on and unmute. See any, Lori?
Then in the spirit of returning to the beginning before we end, I want to revisit the issues of the periodicity of meetings, the number of meetings, periodicity of meetings, the structure of the subgroups, and the deliverables. So earlier, what we identified was that we would have 5 more in-person meetings with some flexible ones as possibilities. Does that still make sense to everybody? And then there's some front loading with regard to deliverables on the climate smart land strategy by mid-July. So we might want our next couple of meetings to have a primary focus on that with a more secondary focus on the modeling, and then after July, amp up the conversation on modeling while we continue to discuss some of the climate smart land strategy draft elements that we feel are most important and we want to bring attention to. So it might be a little bit like, you know, an overlapping approach. And we also need to get everybody's input on expert speaker recommendations over the next couple of weeks. And then we would still be looking at a more final deliverable that encapsulates both the barriers and the priorities for the climate smart land strategy, as well as recommendations on the modeling approaches as a final deliverable that we give into the state. So we've got that in terms of the state's larger reporting on this, which they're going to be doing a more comprehensive and designed product.
I guess the only thing I'm thinking on that line, along those lines is, like you mentioned that, you know, there's an impact factor or effect of having a delivery, and that we want that. And I'm wondering if having a target of having a deliverable at the end of the year that encompasses recommendations that we gave 6 months earlier is what we want to do, or we want to think about having a deliverable that's in July that is those recommendations on that second deliverable.
You know, the only thing that I would suggest, and I'm certainly fine with doing 2 pieces,
right?
But I do think that it gives us the opportunity to highlight certain things from a greater emphasis perspective. To, you know, people have given everything that we thought of the time in July, you know, assuming all those timelines are there. but it does give us a little bit more perspective because they're still working on their final. And it's going to come out in January. So I think if there's something significant there, we have the opportunity to revisit. That's all. You might not like it.
Oh, it won't be reflected.
That's okay.
That's the key.
Yes,
thing. I
understood.
think that's clear.
Understood. But, you know, much as we would like to think that everything that we do is going to be reflected in what you do, A, it won't be, and B, there might be some independence of opinion.
I just wanted to make sure
Yeah,
of that. So I just
understood.
want to suggest that, I just want to be clear, that's all.
Much appreciated. Even though there's a lot of synchronous. Anybody online have any thoughts? Because we're being remarkably efficient here. And we are in the close and next steps category with the idea of having a half hour extra for everybody. So is there anybody online who wanted to say anything further about that? Jen, is there anything else that we should be for having sorry. Is there anything else we should be addressing today? So items. All right. I know that both Jen and Adam, as well as possibly Virginia and Melinda, Hussey, may have suggestions about speakers as well. So please do make sure that we're aware of what your thoughts and recommendations are there. And we have two of our committee members who were not here, Connor and Matt. And I'll make a point of reaching out to both of them as well.
Matt's now on the line.
Oh, he is.
Mhm.
Okay.
He was-
Hi. Hey, Matt. So just to get thoughts and input as well. All right. Well, if that is the case, with all the power vested in me,
Sorry, I just.
I'm going to recognize Hot.
I'm just like writing down my action items. So one was to reread AB 1757 at the beginning. Another is to send you speaker recommendations. And then the third was to revisit barriers to implementation arising from the work groups and areas that we, for discussion at our next meeting. Is that the sum total of my action items? Is there anything else in terms of preparing for the next meeting?
I think that, and do look at the existing climate smart strategy
Yeah,
again.
of course.
And what I would suggest, or certainly for myself in looking at it, I'm going to be looking at what was missing from that we clearly identified as critical actions to take. And to be thinking about those relative to how would the next one better reflect the same priorities that we identified with that.
With a focus on like a particular.
I think that from my perspective, you should take a broad look. You don't need to be limited.
Okay.
That's simply what I would recommend. But
great.
Other people may want to be more limited.
Yeah.
Hey, Christine.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot. I wanted to mention if in this meeting schedule, if we can move around the days of the week, that would be helpful. I know everybody has different constraints, but Tuesdays are like always bad for me. So if we can move around the day of the week for our meetings, I think that'll increase the likelihood of people of accommodating different schedules for in-person.
I know that working with Jen, we will, and perhaps others as well, we will juggle as best as possible. I think in general, we kind of said no Mondays. So, but we'll work our best with that. Thank you, Christy. If other people have like absolute no-go days, please let us know. But do our best. Thanks for bringing that up. All right. You know what we used to do in the UN? You take a gavel and you say, "It is so decided. The meeting has been brought to a close." All right. Thanks, everybody. Thank you guys for being online. Appreciate it.